Butterfly conservation can be said to have had its start with this butterfly, which is called the large copper. Now, this photograph is life-size. That's my initial test to see if you're asleep yet. But it is a big copper. It's twice the size of the purplish coppers we were seeing today, for example. And as you can see, it's a truly copper, like our ruddy copper or our lustrous copper. It's the grandest copper in the world, Lycaena dispar. And it occurred, past tense, in the fens of England. The fens are the alkaline wetlands that run from the coast of the North Sea at the Wash, inland into Essex and Cambridgeshire and Lincolnshire, that great lowland of southeastern England, known as the Wash. And of course, when the sea level was even lower, when all of the species that occur in Britain colonized Britain after glaciation, only 10,000 years ago or so, it wasn't even underwater, but it has been for hundreds of years. And so the large copper evolved into a special British subspecies that occurred in the Wash. Well, you see what the Wash became: rich peatland soils that were good for tulips and celery and carrots and many other kinds of crops. So they were drained. And the Romans began to drain the Wash, the fens, and then the Dutch came along in the 1800s and taught the British how to really drain wetlands. And so by the 19th century, the fens were largely drained and the large copper was on its way out. And the entomologists of London began to notice that the large copper was no longer there. And one of the people who noticed that this was happening was the uncle of this woman. Does anyone recognize this person? Miriam Rothschild, Grand Dame of 20th century conservation in Britain. One of the great non-credentialed amateurs, because women of her class were not educated at university in her day, but she became extraordinarily well educated and became one of the great authorities in the world on the biology of fleas. And I once attended one of the most amazing parties I've ever been to, which was a naturalist party held at this village of Ashton Wald in England for the International Congress of Flea Biologists. I think there were only about 6 of them, so she invited lots of other naturalists from around. Too bad you were in Australia, David, or you would have been there at the time. But Miriam's great uncle, Sir Walter, Lord Walter, not Sir Walter, Lord Walter Rothschild, who used to drive a chariot down Piccadilly pulled by zebras, as they were pronounced, was of the Rothschild contingent that built the great natural history collections, which led to the British Museum's butterfly collection today, the greatest in the world, and to the Whitney collection of birds at the American Museum of Natural History. That all began with the Rothschilds. Uncle Walter noticed, along with his cronies, that the large copper was dropping out of the fens, and in fact it became extinct in the 1860s. And some people said it was collecting. Well, collecting might have been the coup de grace, but it was the drainage of the fens that knocked out the large copper. And so Lord Walter Rothschild started an insect conservation committee in the 19th century that Miriam was successor to, and she has worked in the latter years of her life in spreading native wildflowers on the verges of the freeways and in many, many other aspects of conservation in Britain. She was also an advisor to the Xerces Society throughout her time. I will return to the Xerces Society a little bit later on. This is, by the way, the pub in the village of Ashton Wald. This is the village that belongs to the Rothschilds. Yes, you can own a village. And Lord Walter Rothschild rebuilt the village in Tudor style with thatched cottages. It's a little romantic confection that had the very first electrical service in all of Great Britain in an old mill that is now a museum of dragonflies. But this pub which was on the green, and it was the center of the great party that night I was telling you about, is called the checkered skipper. Now in Britain, a different butterfly is referred to by that title. What we call the checkered skipper, as you know, is Pyrgus communis, or the two-banded checkered skipper, Pyrgus viralis, our little black and white checkered job. But they use that term to refer to the butterfly that we call the common branded skipper, Hesperia common, that occurs up in northern Washington, the Olympics in the North Cascades. But they use a Q, so it's okay, it's a different. But you might notice, this was our van, by the way, for a butterfly watching tour that Tia and I were leading in aid of the Xerces Society. In 1985, after the 10th annual meeting of the Xerces Society at Yale, we led a butterfly watching tour to Britain. Went to the pub, Miriam went out with us, and this is the pub sign. And this is an anatomically correct depiction of Carterocephalus polemon, which we call the Arctic skipper. Whole Arctic butterfly, it occurs here as well as there. And the maculation is made of copper and brass nails. In perfect order. I almost used that in the butterflies of Cascadia for my image of that species. It even has the hooks on the apiculae of the antennae. That's the dorsal side. Then you go around to the other side of the sign, and you've got the ventral. Complete with the legs. So you can imagine a people that would do something like this and produce something like this is a people who cares about, wow, it landed upright, that's cool. Is a people who cares about butterflies, cares about conservation. So the fins were drained, yes, but portions of the fins were left, very small portions. The most notable of which was Wood-Walton Fen, which Lord Rothschild and his cronies bought as one of the earliest nature reserves in Britain. But you see, hundreds of years of agriculture caused the fens to shrink. This is now the level of the fens, and this is the level of the fen that has been preserved. So that would have been the level of the whole landscape before. In order to preserve Wood-Walton Fen, they had to build a clay berm all the way around it to keep the drainage from passing out of the fen. They reintroduced the large copper from Germany, and that did not work. It died out. And then they got the idea, let's reintroduce it from a more similar habitat, and so they reintroduced it from Holland. And the Dutch large copper, which is probably most closely related to it in evolutionary history, took more or less, except it needed help. It needed intensive management to the extent of even taking the immatures indoors every year because it flooded too much in the wintertime and they couldn't quite make it. It was kind of like more like keeping a pussycat than keeping a wild butterfly. And so you can go to Wood-Walton Fen today, this is a female, and see large coppers. But they're managed to such a degree, it's almost an outdoor zoo animal. And not only that, but now we know that they are almost homozygous. They have almost no genetic variation in their gene pool, and therefore no ability to adapt. So it's there, but it was an early experiment. And it was the earliest experiment in the world, as far as I know, of butterfly conservation. So it's important. Now, when I went to Britain in 1971, partly thanks to Al Wagar, who was one of my recommenders and made it possible for me to do the thesis that led to this, I went to Britain as a Fulbright Hays Fellow in 1971 to study butterfly conservation with this gentleman, John Heath, who was the leader of the butterfly mapping project throughout Britain, which was the instigator, which was really the inspiration for all the butterfly mapping that has been done in this country, the Hinchliffe atlases, the Oppler maps, and so on and so forth. Then this is Monkswood Experimental Station. This is actually Monkswood National Nature Reserve, an oak ash woodland that was set aside just above the fens with a high degree of diversity. And adjacent to it is the Monkswood Experimental Station, which was finally closed by the British government in their farsightedness on the 7th of July of 2007. So on 07, they closed the Monkswood Experimental Station. One of the most egregious examples of modern times of short-sightedness as far as conservation, because at no other place in the northern world has more research been done on the management of endangered insects, butterflies, and other organisms. This was the basis for the management of all the national nature reserves around Britain for a long time. But I had the opportunity of studying there during the year when there were 7 government entomologists all working on endangered insect problems at Monkswood. It was a magical time to be there. And John Heath was my advisor. Well, while I was there, there was a fellow on the staff. He was a graduate student, as was I. His name was Jeremy Thomas. He's a kid here. He's my same age, 50, or give or take a decade plus. I'm actually 62, and I think Jerry's probably the same. And he was studying the natural history and ecology of the black hairstreak butterfly, which was dropping out of nature reserve after nature reserve across Britain. As you see, a very pretty hairstreak. And it occurred on these oak ash woodlands on this band of soils, clay soils, between Oxford and Cambridge. Very handy. And people traveling between the two could stop at various woodlands and collect black hairstreaks, brown hairstreaks, a whole guild of butterflies that occurred in those areas. But they were dropping out one by one because of fragmentation, which you all know about. When we split up our forests and they're managed differently, we begin to lose it. So Jerry learned everything that needed to be known about how that butterfly lived, what its host plant was, what age of its blackthorn host plant it needed, the fact that they needed an oak of a certain size nearby that they called the master oak as an A and W for the males and females to get together at. I mean, really, a courtship post of a certain size of oak. He duplicated the conditions that were necessary for this butterfly to survive, and they began to reproduce those conditions in the reserves, and since then the butterfly has spread back in. So this was one of the first great examples of managing landscape for an endangered butterfly and its positive response. Jeremy Thomas is now professor at Oxford, and professor is a word that's not used lightly in Europe. It's a very high title indeed, and he's the far and away the most respected butterfly conservation scientist in Britain. Well, and that's why they gave him the toughest job of all, which was the conservation of the large blue. This is life-size. You see, about half of you are asleep now. I knew it would go that way. The large blue is also bigger than most blues. It's not that big, but it's fully an inch in wingspan. And this genus of blues has heavy black spots both on the upper side and the underside. Genus Maculinea. Now you know, don't you, that a lot of our blues are tended by ants, right? And hair streaks and some copper. The caterpillars exude a honeydew and the ants tend them and they protect them. The commensalism has grown to such an extent of specialization in this genus that the caterpillars, which begin to feed on wild thyme, molt their skin 3 times and then fall onto the ground, whereupon they're picked up by the ants, taken down into the ant nest, probably mistaken for ant brood, and they become carnivorous on the ant brood. And the ants not only tolerate this, but they keep stroking them for honeydew. It's kind of like, go ahead, eat the babies, just keep the honeydew coming. You know? The ants, pardon my teleology, it suggests that, and the caterpillars pupate in the ant nest, and the butterflies actually eclose underground, and they crawl up out of the entrance hole to the ant nest, giving off a pheromone that mimics the friendly pheromone of the ants so they don't attack it. Ain't evolution great? Or whatever your model is. And then they spread their wings. Nothing to laugh about. There are many creation myths, many mechanisms, many ways of looking at it. Never mind. Then they fly away and start over again. As you can imagine, this system is so complex that it's easily disturbed. And so all the Maculineas are endangered across Europe and Asia now today, because most of the ant nests have been screwed up or rid of. And in Britain, the short story is that, so this is where Jeremy Thomas was studying large blue. That's not Oregon, that's England. Did you know that England looked like that? That's the coast of Cornwall. And up on the cliffs above, Jeremy was studying the last known colony of the large blue. They set up a large blue committee in the 1920s. They were losing large blues and they couldn't figure out why. They protected the land, they took the fire off, they took the rabbits off, they took the sheep off, they took the collectors away, and they were still losing them faster than ever. Why? Because they took the rabbits off, they took the fire off, and they took the sheep off. The collectors probably didn't help. Because they changed the management of the turf. And when they took away all those ancient practices, because remember, people evolved with sheep from about day one after glaciation had risen. The nature of the grass turf changed. And when that changed, the species of dominant ant changed. So when the caterpillar fell to the ground and the ant came along and picked it up, what did it do? On three. 1, 2, 3. Ate it. When they finally figured that out, Jeremy finally figured it out, it was down to one site. They had a really bad year. They got 23 through the winter in the laboratory. And all 14 males died before the first female emerged. And the large blue of Britain became extinct in their hands in the laboratory. Jeremy Thomas's brother is a real joker. There were editorials in the Times. I mean, this was big news. It's like, you know, if the bald eagle had become extinct here, or the condor or something. And so Jeremy's brother, who's a great ecologist also in Leeds, gave him a T-shirt that said, "I killed the large blue." But Rudy Mattoni, who of course is the rediscoverer of the Palos Verdes blue in this country, which was thought to have become extinct until Rudy rediscovered it, publishes a journal of research on Lepidoptera, and this issue was published in memoriam to the butterfly. In all seriousness, in memoriam, Maculinea, Arion, Butafron, circa 10,000 BC, 1979 AD. The wide open spaces are closing in quickly from the weight of the whole human race. Waylon Jennings. But they had the example of the large copper. And they knew what not to do, which is to reintroduce it from a single source. Let's see where this goes. Oh, too soon. Does this go back? Cool. So they reintroduced the large blue, but only after they managed the habitat correctly, to get it back into shape, to get the right ants back. And then there was a warming trend, which helped in this case. And they brought the large blue from Sweden. And they brought it from several genetic sources. So there wasn't going to be a homozygous state. There was going to be intermixing of genes. And you know the large blue is doing so well now that it has eaten the ants out of house and home in some of the colonies. So now Jeremy wears his T-shirt proudly. Except the sad part is he can't fit it anymore.
So they now need a new T-shirt that I killed the last ant?
You should have one that says I saved the large blue. Because, you know, that's only 10,000 years, and probably in only, in a small number of years, it'll probably re-evolve the traits of the British large blue. So conservation may not be forever. I mean, you know what I mean. Extinction may not be forever in all cases. And of course, our example. So I was over there studying, and I'm wondering, what the heck am I going to do with all this stuff I'm learning? I was really kind of depressed in November of 1971 because I thought, what am I going to do with all this stuff? And I went to a program on the large blue long before it even became extinct, let alone was saved again, resurrected, in London. And Graham Howarth of the British Museum, did you ever know Graham?
No.
And he said, if we lose the large blue, let's never lose another. Let's let that be a symbol so that we never lose another British butterfly. And in fact, the British Butterfly Conservation Society is extraordinarily strong now. They probably won't lose anymore. Although Margaret Thatcher tried hard, along with the common market, converting a lot of the old habitats. But nonetheless, that's what they did. So I was on the train home that night, and I said, you know what? We lost a blue, in 1943. In 1875, Herman Baer, the great Californian lepidopterist, wrote a letter to Herman Strecker in Chicago. And in that letter he said, as regards the vicinity of San Francisco, the Xerxes blue is already extinct. He said, between German chickens and Irish hogs, no insect can live in San Francisco but louse or flea. And we have that letter in the Field Museum. He was mistaken. It wasn't extinct yet, but the Xerxes blue did become extinct on a world basis in San Francisco in 1943 through the expansion of military facilities at Presidio. And so it occurred to me, we've lost the blue, we've got a symbol. We could have something called the Xerxes Society. And X stands for extinction and makes a nice logo with butterfly wings. And so we do. And Xerxes Society, of course, was the recipient of the Butterfly-a-thon. It was part of the Butterfly Big Year that many of you contributed to. We raised $45,000 for habitat conservation through the Butterfly-a-thon by people pledging per species that I saw. And I do have copies here of the new wings. Not enough for all of you, sadly. I should have had a lot more sent. But I'm going to put them here and you can have a rush on them at the end. And anyone who would like a copy and doesn't get one, just drop a quick email or note to Xerxes or tell me and we'll get you a copy. It's a beautiful issue with a wonderful water strider on the front. And it has a stunning picture by some woman named Ivy Olsch? No, that's not it. Ivy Olsch on page 17 from was that a WABA field trip, Ivy?
Yes.
Of 2 kids with a butterfly net. And this is an article that I wrote called Beauty of Butterfly Nets.
A wonderful article that Bob wrote.
Thank you, Eddie. And there's also a wonderful piece just before it called Capturing Butterflies Photographically. So they did a pairing of a photography and a netting. But it's a nice issue. So please pick one up and let us know if you don't get one. So the Xerxes Society has been going now since December 9th of 1971. It's got a wonderful staff in Portland of young people who are doing beautiful work. And our own Caitlin Labar has worked for Xerxes, is working for Xerxes right now on their wetland work. And Caitlin, let's give a hand to her. She and David and others are among the up-and-coming young conservationists who are going to make all this vision work. So the Xerxes blue was lost, or was it? In the new Pelhamian catalog, you know what I'm talking about? John Pelham's masterwork, the catalog of North American butterflies, the Xerxes blue is considered, as some have considered it, a very distinct subspecies of the silvery blue. Now, if that is indeed the case, what about taking the nearest silvery blues, which are up in Marin County, and plunking them down in the Presidio, where Xerxes was last known, which has been restored as old San Francisco Duneland now, and seeing if we can't, in time, re-evolve something like the Xerxes blue. So I have proposed this. We'll see if anybody takes it up. I call it resurrection ecology. Well, many of you know this animal. Katie's worked on this and many of her colleagues, and of course, John and Ellie know this very well, and others of you. This is the Fender's blue, named for a great old Northwest lepidopterist, Kenny Fender, whose wife is still living. Her former wife is still living, Dorothy McKay Fender, who is one of the great authorities on earthworms on the whole West Coast. Still living. But this is a beautiful picture by Alan St. John of the Fender's blue. So that is endangered today, as is federally endangered listed, as is its host plant, Kincaid's lupin. Thought to be extinct, rediscovered in the Willamette Valley by Dana Ross and Paul Hammond and others. And now lots of work has gone into it through Cheryl Schultz's lab and others, protected, and it looks like it's doing pretty well. So conservation can bring about the salvation of animals that we have almost lost. And this is a good example. This is a member of the species that we call Guadalball's blue. It used to be called the common blue. But Fender's blue is federally endangered. The mission blue is federally endangered. And another subspecies of that species is federally endangered. So it doesn't make much sense to call it the common blue anymore. Waterfall's blue. But the Fender's blue is a beautiful example. Now, why is it? Why is it that certain species would be endangered even unto the point of extinction, whereas not that distantly related species proliferate? And what is this one, do you suppose? Beg your pardon?
Why do all blue?
Dotted blues?
Pardon?
Dotted blues?
No, neither. But they're good guesses. They both do this. And actually, they might be among it. But most of these are what we used to call northern blues, and they're now Anna's blues. Cascadian patch of Anna's blues. Really common. Why? Why, when others are endangered? To answer that question, we have to begin to look at the characteristics of animals that cause them to become endangered. And that means looking at their whole ecology and their whole biology. So if we're starting with blues, let's talk about morphos for a minute. A little bit bigger than our blues. Same idea, refractive scales that produce the blue color, which isn't really there. You know, it's a fugitive color, it's not a pigmented color. But the morphos were long thought to be endangered in Brazil, and indeed in places they are in the tropics. But it was thought to be through collecting and through mercantile activities, because millions of them were collected for jewelry. Laws were passed that they have to be farmed in some countries, that only males could be used. The fact is, only males were used because the males are blue and the females are not. And the males, as we know, for most species, are largely expendable in nature. You're supposed to laugh at that, right? Uncomfortably. Yeah, ha ha ha, right. But it's true. Now, most females of a population will be fecundated even if you remove most of the males. And that has been the basis for game management forever. And to some extent it's true. Butterflies mate in the standard fashion, as you know. And it makes beautiful valentines. I just love this. I don't know this from a space shuttle. So anyway, where was I? Butterflies make beautiful valentines. And in doing so, of course, they produce many more of themselves, because insects, as you know, are prodigious reproducers. This is why it's so terribly difficult for the most inefficient predators on the face of the earth, that is us with the butterfly net, to have much effect on their populations. The colors of the butterflies are transmitted, as we know, by their scales, either pigmented or structural, refracting the light or reflecting the light. And they have many, many protective features that are imbued by those scales. And here are two great examples. Eye spots on a common alpine or a butler's alpine, and tails on swallowtails. Well, this was on a North Cascades class that I taught one time. And here we have a bird-struck butler's alpine, that whole part of that left hind wing removed, revealing the eye spots on the right hind wing. You see how that works? And on this swallowtail, this whole part of this hind wing is removed, thereby revealing the dorsal surface of the right hind wing. So both of these butterflies have been struck by birds on the left hind wing. And that was exactly what was supposed to happen. The predation of birds has been the driving force, the adaptive load, we would say, for the evolution of eye spots on the browns and ringlets, tails on swallowtails, the convergent evolution of eye spots on so many butterflies like hackberries, convergent evolution of tails on tail blues and on hair streaks. When you find a butterfly with a tail and a red spot and a blue spot, they didn't all come from the same source. They are not what we call homologous. You know, the tail blue did not evolve from the swallowtail. No, they started from the same basic genetic building blocks, and the tails and the blue and the red evolved over and over and over. Same with eye spots. We call that convergent evolution. If something works well in nature, it happens again and again and again. Are we clear on that? Any questions on that? Through natural selection. And so, bingo. What sex of the swallowtail, by the way?
Male?
Well done. There's the claspers. And so these were both bird struck, and so they're very well protected. So if they're so well protected, why do they need the Xerces Society? What is that picture supposed to convey? I have no idea. Oh, I guess it's aposematism. This is Tia's wonderful photograph of the so-called Great Purple Hair Streak. It's always been called the Great Purple Hair Streak, even though it has no purple on it. It's really blue. Swimming butterfly. Pardon? But notice that this one has two big defenses. First of all, it's got the fancy tails, the so-called false head hypothesis. It's not a hypothesis anymore, it's up to theory because it really works. Birds strike it there. But if a bird should ever get the body, oh, puke, because it's highly toxic. This butterfly feeds on mistletoes as larvae, oak mistletoes. We've never had this in Washington, by the way, and I predict this will be a state record in Washington sometime. We don't have any oak mistletoe. If you go in the Willamette Valley, all the oaks, a lot of the oaks have oak mistletoe. John, you live in the Gary Oak Zone. Have you ever seen phorandendron in Washington on oak? No.
Fort Lewis, they have lots of oaks.
Yeah, not a single oak mistletoe.
Really?
I've never seen one plant in Washington. And if John Davis hadn't seen them, they ain't there. So if we ever get oak mistletoe, which will come with global warming, we'll probably get this too. Anyway, the red on the abdomen and the red on the base of the forewings is convergently evolved with its Mullerian mimic, the Atala butterfly, with the moth called the Faithful Beauty, the Composia fidelissima in Florida. A whole array of southern butterflies that have red abdomens, red near the body, and they taste terrible. And if a butterfly hits them, if a bird hits them, they will not hit them again. So that's called aposematism, or warning coloration. And we've got both that plus the false head on a great purple hair streak. So why did they need the Xerces Society? They got all this stuff. Or how about this? This is one of the greatest cases of camouflage on the face of this particular universe, and maybe more. I love this. This is called Shinia natalii. You know Nuttall, the great exploring naturalist. This is Nuttall's flower moth. And it occurs in Colorado, maybe other states, in the Ponderosa Pine Zone, not in Washington, on Gaillardia, the Indian blanket flower where the Gaillardia fire wheel flowers. And look at what it does. It really perches that way. It's a noctuid moth, as you see. And the thorax is brilliantly yellow, matches the gray flowers of the Gaillardia. The wings are red and mottled. They match the disc flowers, and it perches that way. Ain't nature great? So, I mean, superb camouflage for birds. So why does it need the Xerces Society? And why? I mean, I could have spent these last 35 years usefully. Why is a butterfly like the Dakota skipper almost gone and less abundant every single year, is dropping from the American scene? It's not listed yet, but if anything should be listed, it should be the Dakota skipper. It's just dropping. It's in the American tallgrass prairie. This is a native plant in the American prairies, this pine lily, and Dakota skipper basket. Isn't that pretty? But it's elegiacal because it's going, it's going, it's going. And yet this butterfly, which somebody saw today, right? Who saw a woodland skipper today?
Your wife.
David. Paul.
Yeah.
Good. Well done. All of you will be seeing these by the bazillions in about 2 weeks, right? Everywhere in Washington will be the woodland skipper. The stigma and then that mark there. Incredibly, and yet that one that looks so much like it is incredibly endangered. Why? And by the way, who cares? If we've got that, why do we need that? Well, you're too sophisticated to even go into that stupid question. I'm not even going to bother. But why is that one so common and the other one is so rare? Well, that's the question that underlies all conservation. It's what ecologists would call R species versus K species. R means butterflies and other creatures that put all their marbles into reproductivity. They're generalists, they have a lot of food plants, they usually have multiple broods, though the woodland skipper does not, and they can reproduce under a lot of conditions. The K species are the especially adapted to certain circumstances, and they better be right, or I'm going to take my ball and go away and become extinct. And that's what spotted owls and Johnson's hair streaks and Dakota skippers do. So we got generalist and specialist species. I mean, this is how I love to see the woodland skippers. This is in our backyard in August or September probably. It might even be October. No, not October, because they always last right up to the 1st of October and then they're all gone. Probably September, all basking on the Asian pear in the afternoon. That's how we like to see our butterflies. We enjoy rarity, don't get me wrong, we do enjoy rarity, don't we? We love it when we see something rare, but we don't want it to go away. So we have to ask, what are the resources they depend upon? And we all know that butterflies feed through a proboscis, which is a pair of drinking straws that are bonded together like a Ziploc bag. That's not a giant mosquito, that's a... What species? That's a British picture. Any guesses what species that is? It's a butterfly that we have both in Britain and in Washington. We saw it today. I saw it today. I don't think anybody else did.
Cabbage white?
Cabbage white. It's cabbage white. So that's how they take their food. But you know, they don't all subsist solely on nectar. A butterfly cannot live by nectar alone. So butterflies do go to nectar. Oh boy, there's an extraordinary picture. I didn't take it. Of a, anybody know? Question mark, yes, Polygonia. And this is great. Don't be afraid of the scientific names. You know, it's an anglewing, right? Anglewings and commas belong to what genus? Polygonia, which means the polygon butterflies, the angled wings, polygons, angles. But what species is this? The question mark, and what is this scientific name? Polygonia interrogationis. What a great name. Question mark. So they do nectar. Yes, they nectar. We know they nectar. And by the way, I really wish I could tell all my Native Plant Society friends, and we're life members, that they really prefer native nectar. People really want to think the butterflies prefer native nectar and that they do better on native nectar. And maybe they do in some places, you know. And we use native plants as much as we can, but that's knapweed. That's the biggest two-tailed tiger swallowtail I've ever seen. Tia took that picture, and that's life-size. That's a little less than that. So, I mean, they actually really do take advantage of a lot of the introduced weeds. Now, this is not to say we shouldn't prosecute our fights against introduced exotic plants. Of course we should. But we need to recognize that butterflies are not as nice in their distinction sometimes as we are. Western tiger is perfectly happy to nectar on a garden phlox and a pale tiger on a lilac. I mean, good nectar is good nectar as far as they're concerned. And we know that from looking at buddleia, which is beginning to emerge as an invasive weed, which we never thought it was before. So you've got to keep that straight. And keep in mind that a lot of animals do take advantage of the available resources, and whether or not they're native is not necessarily their concern as it is ours. We shouldn't transplant our values on the animals themselves. None of that is to say we shouldn't fight for the native flora. I'd push the button tomorrow to restore the native flora if I could. But this is important to know, and the reason this is important to know as a conservationist is that if you remove non-native resources sometimes, exotic weeds, without paying attention to what's using them first, you could actually cause the extinction of some organisms that have adapted to using them. And the best example is probably the monarch in the west, the westernmost monarchs in California that overwinter on eucalyptus for the most part. Most of the native plants people want to get rid of eucalyptus, but if we got rid of them all tomorrow, we would extirpate the westernmost monarchs. Yes, David?
What if you remove the tumble mustard on San Juan Island?
Exactly. If we have removed the tumble mustard, which is in the National Parks Management Plan, the tumble mustard and the black rape from San Juan Island, we probably would have extirpated or very close to extirpated the island marble, which is the most recently discovered fabulous new butterfly in Washington.
So ignore the invasives?
No, no, thank you.
What's the balance? How do you
Yes,
do that?
exactly. So where we're going from that is not to ignore the invasives, but to survey what's using them. And as we remove the invasives, if it's possible to do, provide alternative resources for anything that's uncommon that's using them. That's easier said than done, but we just need to be aware of the consequences of our actions. So with the eucalyptus in California, let's start restoring the native California coastal forests of live oak, redwood, Monterey pine, and cypress, and start getting them going before we cut down all the eucalyptus. And we hope the monarchs will make the adaptive switch back to the native trees that they made to the eucalyptus. So you're absolutely right. No, it's not, certainly not to ignore the invasives, but just be aware of what we're doing when we are doing so. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So butterflies don't simply nectar, as you know. They use a lot of other resources. Red spotted purple, nectaring here, or sipping from a rotting pear. They'll use a lot of different sugar sources for starch. But they also use inorganic materials, minerals, salts, from the soil that are dissolved there. As Dave said last night, it's mostly males that do this. You will find the occasional female at mud puddles, maybe fewer than 1% in my experience. Well fewer, but I do find females there, but very, very few. Almost all males at mud puddles. And you've all seen that phenomenon. It's one of the great butterfly watching phenomena. But they also, now girls, here come the gross pictures. And it gets grosser. In fact, there's one, if you like that cow poop picture, you're going to love the next picture. Unfortunate turtle in the middle of the road, but a really rich source of amino acids, nitrogenous organic materials, and tiger swallowtails and pearl crescents coming to them. We're talking about pearl crescent. See how much open orange in the pearl crescent. Females will come to carrion as well as males. And then it gets even worse because butterflies will also come to poop. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is Tia's photograph of the North Cascades, I think Pipestone Canyon. Butler's alpines and Cascade checker spot visiting bear scab. Very rich source of amino acids. So these are among the kinds of resources they require. And this is the sort of knowledge we have to have when we start asking conservation questions. But of course, it's not just about the adult butterfly. We have to ask what the rest of the butterfly requires. Yes, on the big year, I did count immatures, just as we did today. The NABA butterfly counts don't allow you to count immatures as species. We did when the Xerces Society ran the butterfly counts, because the adult is only 1/4 of the animal. You've got all these other bits of the animal that Dave and Dave have told us so much about. So here we have a, tell me the species, Dave, or Dave? Pardon? Yes, an Anicia checker. And Dave, I mean, I was with you when we found a whole bunch of these. This is at somewhere in the Cascades. We were finding them both on the Pennsylvania and on the Castanea that day. And there's a pupa of a Chalcedon checker spot from California. But clearly, the animal, for its conservation, requires the entire array of its resources, not just what the adult requires. And that's Sylvia, the woman, Sylvia co-authored the wonderful big lichens book.
Charnel.
Thank you. Charnel took this picture and that pupa as well. Now we know that some species as larvae are specialists and some are generalists. And then they require different resources. So if you were to find a caterpillar that looked basically like that, gravity demonstrated yet again. And it was feeding on this sedum, what's Denapedal? What is this sedum? Say it again.
Lanceolata.
Lanceolata, that's what it is, yes. Sedum lanceolata. Well, we know what it would turn into, right? What? Smithius, the mountain Parnassian. Exactly. Checkering and Teddy. Ran on the forward. But if a caterpillar that looked roughly like that were to be found feeding on this, which is a stand of bleeding heart that Tia and I have been favoring in our little patch of woods for years, and it's getting bigger and bigger, I'm happy to say, we would end up with an animal like this. Floatius, thank you. For all I know, this is like connected to a red telephone in Moscow or something. No red spots in the forewing, all black and teddy, that's the Floatius Parnassian. Actually, one of my few Mea culpa. Did you take this, Steve? Sorry. Yes, it's quite true, he said, recovering, that the two-tailed tiger swallowtail will nectar on a great array of things. What about the larvae? Will they generalize as well, or are they specialists? Well, here's a case of an animal that used to be rather specialized, because two-tailed tigers primarily feed in the wild on wild cherries, on choke cherries. Is that your experience, Dave?
Yeah.
And Dave, choke cherries? Yeah. But you can go to almost any town throughout the Intermountain West and all down into Mexico, and one of the most commonly used shade trees is Fraxinus viridis, the green ash, the introduced green ash. And that's how I found the county record for this butterfly in Adams County. I said, let's go find some green ash. Went to the high school, there was some green ash, went up, there was that caterpillar. Because this butterfly has adapted superbly to green ash throughout the Intermountain West and is undoubtedly a much more abundant butterfly than it was in pre-human contact times. At least I suspect it is, because there's all the green ash. Other butterflies, however, have not been able to make such an adaptive shift to newly available resources. So if you go to the zebra swallowtail, sure, they'll nectar on anything like lantana, but if you want to have a population of them anywhere near, you've got to have, anybody know?
Pawpaw.
Pawpaw, that's exactly right. If you don't have pawpaw, you don't have zebra swallowtails. So you see, conservation depends in part on what the animals do with respect to their changing environment. Have they been able to shift to suit our circumstances, or have they not? And so we return to Great Britain, to the fens. And here we have the great marshes that the fens constitute with their reed patches, and here you see bundles of reed cut down below. Remember the pretty thatched houses in Ashton Wall, the pub, Checker Skipper? That's what these reeds are used for thatching. And that cutting of thatch has been done for many, many, many centuries. That particular management regime favored a certain kind of umbelliferous plant called Bucedum plaster, which was the host plant of, get ready for a brilliant British solipsism, the swallowtail. Is that fair?
It's fair.
Did anybody have any idea what I just said? I mean, the center of the Earth isn't actually at Greenwich. But one could think so from the fact that they have the wren, the swift, and the swallowtail. But it really just reflects the fact that it's a rather small fauna. It's just great love of a small fauna, is really what it is. So this is the only swallowtail in Britain. And it's the same species as our Oregon swallowtail and the Old World swallowtail in Alaska, same species. And this is a beautiful picture Tia took on Ragged Robin in the Norfolk Broads. That butterfly used to occur at Wicken Fen, which is the fen that Darwin used to go to when he cut classes and went out collecting beetles. He cut out of his theology classes and went to Wicken Fen and collected beetles and chased the swallowtails. And look what happened. But unfortunately, during the war, World War II, there were no men around to cut the thatch anymore. and the fens grew up in willows. What does that remind us of a recent story we heard? So the embarrassment is transatlantic. But the British have done a little more to restore it. So they restored Wicken Fen. The swallowtail had become extinct there. They brought the swallowtail back from Norfolk, where it still occurred, and plunked it down in Wicken Fen, and they all flew away. Because the Norfolk populations are larger, and they're more or less, they fly around a lot. Wicken Fen is very small, and they had actually evolved a stay-at-home population. So Jack Dempster, who was the teacher of Jeremy Thomas, the guy I showed you earlier, said, well, if we take enough swallowtails from Norfolk Broads and plunk them into Wicken Fen, we'll have the gene frequency necessary to select for a stay-at-home individual, right? So he figured the only way he could do that is to track the caterpillars, to find a whole lot of pupae. And so he did it radioactively. But to do that, he had to put a little radioactive tag in the caterpillars, and he had to get permission from the British Home Office to do that. And his permit said that if they lost any radioactive material, he had to notify the authorities. So one day there was a caterpillar missing, and he thought, now what do I do about this? And so he bicycled into the village, and here was the Bobby on his bicycle, with his Bobby hat on. And he said, I'd like to report some missing radioactive material on the... Oh, yes, well, hello, hello, hello. What kind of radioactivity is it? He said, it's a radioactive caterpillar. And the Bobby said, right, sir, I'll call in all the birds. True story, this actually was the state of British conservation. But anyway, they did reintroduce it to Wicken Fen, and it took off. And then a manager got the wrong word, and he mowed the fen at the wrong time of year, and it became extinct again. So I mean, this is incremental work. This is hard stuff. It has to be done over and over. This, anybody know this butterfly? Tia's wonderful picture again. In Adams County. I think this was the Adams County record of this butterfly.
Carry on.
So what is it? It's the old world swallowtail. We call it the Oregon swallowtail. State butterfly of Oregon. It's actually a mated pair. Look, there's the male. There's the antennae. That's the female. Great picture. And that butterfly is one that is doing okay, but it suffered dramatically from the dams in the Columbia. Probably lost 75% of its old habitat from dams in the Columbia. Whereas this butterfly, so you see there we have a continuum. An extreme specialist of the British Old World swallowtail, only on Bucent and Palliser and certain marshes, to the Oregon swallowtail, which feeds on Artemisia dracunculus in the canyons, and it's still there, though a lot of it's been lost, to this related butterfly, the Annis swallowtail, which, as you know, has the broadest ecological amplitude of probably any butterfly in Washington. It occurs from the low desert to the high mountaintops, in the cities, in the central district of Seattle, on the fennel, in the alleys, incredibly diversified habitats. And so there you have the entire spectrum of specialization versus and of course, it always pays to look out in your garden and find the third instar caterpillar crawling out of its old bird turd suit. Now this is one I got to see on the big year only by luck, because the first day I was in the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, it rained 4 inches. The second day the sun came out and we found it. This is Hessel's hair streak. Very, very rare. Only occurs in a few locations up and down the East Coast where the caterpillars feed on white cedar, in white cedar bogs. And it's got a fairly grainy pattern in the scales underneath. Hard to find. Wonderful butterfly. But it's very similar to a butterfly that I don't have a picture of, called the olive hair streak, which is widespread on junipers of all sorts, and in fact we now know even takes in our western red cedar hair streaks here in Washington. Hugely abundant butterfly across the country on red cedars, but white cedar, white spruce butterfly, very, very rare. So, another example. And of course, our grand example of a specialist in Washington is one that David Droppers not long ago found the second county record in Snohomish, something like that, on a WAPA field trip to Monte Cristo, is that correct? And this was a big deal to find Johnson's hairstreak there. In order to find the Johnson's hairstreak on the butterfly pigeon, Tia and I went up in the canopy crane at Carson, the research crane that takes you up into the canopy, the old growth forest at Carson. We found eggs on the mistletoe. Those eggs have been reared through and the adults have not come out. So that was very, very exciting. But Johnson's hairstreak lays its eggs on mistletoe in old growth hemlocks, of which there aren't many left. So that's probably, I would say, probably our most specialized butterfly in Washington State. Not listed, but probably should be. Yes?
Comments.
Comment.
I gotta thank you, Bob, for telling Ken Bible and Matt Schroeder and Ray Davis, otherwise I wouldn't have a job with the Forest Service right now. So
Oh, good.
thank you very much.
You bet. David is monitoring these because there's a fellow named Ray Davis who has modeled, and thank you for bringing that up because it's much more important than what I was saying. He has modeled the kinds of conditions that this butterfly requires, in much the way that Jeremy Thomas did with the black hairstreak in England way back in the 70s. But now he has computers. Jeremy didn't have computers even, you know. And so he's modeled this, and he's sending David out to check out all these habitats that he thinks should have it due to his model. Well, most of them don't because he's narrowing down his model. And so David's going out on a bunch of goose chases. But if it's there, David's going to find it. So we hope to save Johnson's hairstreak, named for the same guy, O.B. Johnson, for which Johnson Hall at the University of Washington is named. And if you will look on your copy of Cascadia on page 26, you will see a wonderful picture of O.B. Johnson with a number of ladies in long dresses catching insects on the University of Washington campus when it was old growth forest in the Seattle Naturalists Club, which we could say is almost a linear ancestor of Waba. That's the kind of forest it requires, but it doesn't do so well when the forest becomes like this. And this is Weyerhaeuser business as usual in Waukegan County in the 1970s. Weyerhaeuser doesn't really log like that right now. In fact, Weyerhaeuser is selling almost all their timber holdings in Washington now for outlets like that. That kind of logging is actually business as usual, and the head walls fail, and a lot of water goes into, a lot of soil goes into the salmon streams, and we lose not only Johnson's hairstreak, but our various salmon as well. Now, so clearly, coming down to the conclusion here, what we want for butterflies are going to be butterflies and what they require. Whereas, if we look at a lot of our other rangeland, it can be more like this. Now, I'm not saying there's no place for cattle. Certainly cattle in Britain are very important to the management scheme. And I happen to be one who thinks that cattle grazing in the American West, done in a progressive way, is probably more helpful to our native fauna and flora than some alternative uses, like soybean fields. So I'm not saying cattle free in '93, which never really panned out. But I am saying when it gets like this, it's no good for the cows or the butterflies or the people who depend upon ranching. And we come now to the great example that David showed us last night. This was the Moxie Bog in its heyday. This was Moxie Bog photographed a few miles from here, what, 10 miles from where we are right now?
Yeah.
First butterfly preserve in North America that I'm aware of. When Dave McCorkle discovered the butterfly there, as Charles, you asked last night, there are about 20 sites for the pearl-bordered fritillary or the pearl-bordered, lesser pearl-bordered fritillary in Washington. But this was, at the time, I think, the only known site in Washington. Nature Conservancy preserved it as one of its very first projects in Washington. And that's what it looked like. Dave, that's a picture from 1970.
Yeah.
That's almost 40 years ago. So I took that when I was 12. Very striking, isn't it? The relict bog and the sage hills above. And this was crawling with Beloria selene. 3 generations. 3 broods. Absolutely abundant. That's just my favorite. I got bitten on my foot by an ambush bug that day. Man, did that hurt. But now it's very, very different. And it's not through lack of care on the part of the conservatives. In fact, they hired Merrill Peterson to tell them what to do out there, but they never had the resources or the people on the ground to do what needed to be done. So I'm glad, Dave, that you're interested in seeing if we can resurrect the site, and we can do some resurrection ecology there. Mima Mounds, another great Washington site. How many of you have been to the Mima Mounds? Either the DNR Preserve, Scatter Creek, Glacial Heritage, Fort Lewis. You know, we have this small array of what used to be a vast area of the so-called Pimple Prairie. And we won't even go into their origin now. I have my thoughts, you have yours. But I will say that because these grasslands were forested much later than most of the other Puget Sound lowlands, because of their hardpan, their glacial outwash hardpan, a lowland prairie butterfly fauna persisted there much longer than most other places in Washington. And consequently, this is the home ground of the originally known Mardon skippers in the world before they were ever discovered in the Cascades. And the Edith's checker spot, known as Taylor's, and several others, the Valley silver spot and so on. Mostly gone, mostly developed, mostly changed. The Mima Mounds has had a lot of management for weeds. Well, we lost most of the rare butterflies on the Mima Mounds Preserve in a single day. And I have to tell you that in my view, after the butterfly big year and studies with colleagues for years, is one of the greatest threats to our American butterflies today is overzealous burning on nature reserves. The Otto skipper has been extirpated from the state of Iowa by the Nature Conservancy and the DNR preserve managers. Not by will, not by intention, and they'd be very upset to hear me say that, but I believe it's the case, because they were present on lots of preserves that have been burned aggressively, and they're not fire adapted unless you have many, many thousands of acres of prairie, and they can recolonize. When you have 100 acres here, 20 acres here, and 1,000 acres over there, and you burn them all every year or every other year, and they can't recolonize, you lose the butterflies. We're losing the regal fritillary. This year, the Otto skipper has disappeared from most of its Illinois sites and others, and fire is a big part of it. So on the Mima Mounds, they were going to burn for Scott's broom. It needed to be done, and for Douglas fir. But Pelham and I, double-handedly, convinced them not to burn the whole thing in 2 years. We said, you'll lose all the butterflies that this was partly set aside for. And you can imagine Pelham in a meeting, you know, he's fairly compelling. And so they said, okay, we'll do it in 4 years. Well, we said, even that's a lot. So we came down to a plan where the center of the preserve was going to be unburned, where the least broom was. And that was okay. And then the burn here, the burn here, the burn there, and they recolonized from the center. The very first fire got away, burned the whole thing. The Mardon skipper, the Oregon skipper, the Sonora skipper, and the Edith's checker spot, if it was still there, probably all became extinct in the Mima Mounds on that day. And I may exaggerate, but I may not.
When did that happen?
Oh, it's about 10 or 12 years ago, maybe 15. So, I mean, these are good people. And they're all working to preserve this land and to get them back into other places. Nobody's bad here. But there is such an enthusiasm for fire in nature conservation, appropriately, that it goes to extremes. And too much is burned too fast and too frequently. And the invertebrates can't take it. And that's just the butterflies. We don't have any background knowledge on the ants, other soil invertebrates. We're probably losing it. So what we're ending up is with these green flower garden preserves with no pollinators. So that's a real problem. And the Edith's checker spot, the Taylor's checker spot, is one that has become extraordinarily uncommon in the Puget Sound Basin. But the good news is that there are very good people working on conserving these, and Katie is one of those, and others, David, and we've got a generation of people coming along, finding these and working on how to understand and keep them around. When I first came to Washington, it was on a train and, to come to the UW in 1965. I mean, my mother brought me out in 64, and then I came in 65 to go to the UW. And I came on the train up from Vancouver up to Seattle, and I saw all these wonderful meadows. I said, wow, that's so rich, that's going to be full of hair streaks, all kinds of wonderful things. I thought that was a great scene. I mean, it's very pretty. Actually, I took this picture in about 67, I think, out by Puyallup. I'd much rather have that. Now it's all malls and things out there now. But there's not a native plant to be seen except for the trees. It's all creeping buttercup and donkeys. There's no butterflies there. I didn't know that. I thought it looked great. And one had to find out that the absence of any native plants and any diversity meant that there was almost nothing there. This is what we want to conserve when we possibly can. Our rich native habitats dominated by native species. Sure, there's going to be some introduced species in amongst them that we can deal with in good time, we hope. But this is the sort of place where we find our rich natural butterfly heritage up at Sun Mountain. And when we don't have that luxury, then we have to rebuild on what we have. And there we finally have a two-tailed tiger swallowtail nectaring on a native plant. No knapweed there. A nice fall spread. So we will have these extreme specialists, such as the Mitchell's Marsh Satyr, which is one I never did manage to see last year. It occurs only in a few poison sumac and larch bogs here and there that are very difficult to get into. And not many people have seen, and whether we'll conserve that or not is going to depend on what we can all get done amongst us. We have the Oregon silver spot. That was one of the first butterflies listed. Still present in Oregon, being bred in large numbers. David, you work on this, don't you, at the zoo?
Yes.
David and his colleagues at the Woodland Park Zoo, and also folks at the Washington Park Zoo in Portland, rear these for reintroduction in the wild. This was not known from Washington for many, many years. I refound it in 1975 in the Long Beach Peninsula. Land was conserved with your tax-paying money and managed for it, but it's been extirpated since then because of a series of bad summers. So we need to reintroduce this to Washington. Feeds on the blue violets, the viola adunca, which have been planted out in large numbers out of the protected habitat now. We're just missing the butterfly. This is the habitat that occurs on the Oregon coast. It's known as the Salt Spray Meadows, and it was Dave McCorkle, same guy that found the silver-bordered fritillary in Muncie, who figured out that this habitat was very special on the Oregon coast. It used to occur in Washington too. Salt Spray Meadows, mostly converted to condominiums, golf courses, state parks, and salal brush. But the few last patches have been protected now and are being carefully managed, although the butterfly is a difficult one. Or how about this fritillary? Nokomis. Has anyone here seen Nokomis? Wonderful fritillary of the seeps of the American deserts. Also a violet feeder, of course, but only on certain seeps. When we started talking about protecting this butterfly in 1973, everybody laughed at us. Several years later, look at all the agencies that wanted to sign up as partners to protect that butterfly on the uranium mines of Colorado. It became extinct at that site anyway, in spite of all that effort. So the best laid plans do not necessarily result in the conservation of the animal, but building the partnerships is where it has to start. Anybody know that fritillary? A regal fritillary, the biggest fritillary in the world. Regal fritillary. This is a butterfly. I received the pupa as a door prize at the Northwest Lepidopterist meeting in Corvallis in October. I brought it home and it hatched in November. What was I going to do with it? So I kept it as a pet for 9 weeks. I took it out to fly it on warm days in December. Marcia handy in order to catch it if it flew too far. And we fed it on apricot nectar, and it finally died. But in the wild, that butterfly is in the tall grass prairie. One of its favorite violets is the bird's foot violet. And it's a butterfly that has dramatically shrunk in range, almost extinct in its eastern range now. Jeff Glassberg and his colleagues in NABRA are working on protecting it in Pennsylvania at the very last site. But in the Midwest, it's still common in places, and I was able to see hundreds of them on the wing in one particular protected habitat in Illinois that they are managing properly for. It hasn't been burnt too much. But where it's burnt too much, it disappears. So you see, it's the choices we make. And the last fritillary I'm going to talk about is the Diana fritillary, the Halloween butterfly. There's the male. And the female, as you know, do I have a female? No, I don't have a female. The female, I do, but not the right female for this discussion. The female is blue. It's blue. It's a mimic of the pipevine swallowtail, like the many black swallowtails whose females go very blue. And again, this is a butterfly that's seriously common in some places and seriously rare in others, and it's getting rarer and rarer, largely because of mountaintop removal coal mining. We've all heard about mountaintop removal. Well, one of the direct victims of mountaintop removal coal mining is the Diana fritillary. So every conservation issue affects butterflies. We finally come down to what we're doing to the climate. This is a female, but not that. This is the Uncompahgre fritillary that occurs only above 13,000 feet in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. And 1 year ago tomorrow, Scott Black, the director of Xerces, and I started at 8,500 feet, hiked up to 13,500, and found this butterfly. And it was one of the most exciting days of the butterfly beginning. But we didn't see as many as there should have been. And the numbers seemed to be diminishing. And it was predicted that this would be one of the first butterflies to subside due to global warming. It feeds on snow willow up in the high elevation, and it's predicted to be just pushed off the top of the mountain by the drying and the warming. So far it's holding up. We hope it will.
Scott's changed a lot.
Yeah, I know. Scott's grown his hair. You know. I wear skirts. You know, we change. And that's Uncompahgre Mountain. And that's the kind of habitat this butterfly occurs in. Way up in the snow willow, about 13,000 feet.
Is that the only peak? I know there's other places above 13,000 in Colorado, but this is the only one where that butterfly
It's the only range, Alan. It's only in the San Juans.
is only in that range.
And it's not very many. There are only 13 known sites. And it's been surveyed extensively by Scott and others. Scott was an Uncompahgre fritillary researcher long before he became the director of Xerces. So we didn't even go to Uncompahgre. We went to Red Cloud Mountain, which is nearby. But it is very narrowly restricted in the world to just a few peaks in that area. So this is our Beans Arctic, our Washington subspecies of the Melissa Arctic, that I have seen only on the summit of Chopaka Mountain. If you hike up to the top of Chopaka Mountain in Okanagan County, you can see this butterfly in the last 100 feet of the mountain. From the summit down 100 feet is the only place I found it. So it doesn't have very far to move up the mountain as things get warmer. Pretty good mimic or camouflage on the That's one of our rarest Washington butterflies. Has anyone here seen it? Dave? It's a mole. Walk up Chopaka, see that butterfly. And this is the larva. I think I'm the only person to have reared the Valorata Arctic. Have you guys done it from the Olympics? It's the Crixus Arctic from the Olympic Mountains. I reared it from eggs. I got it through 2 winters, one in a refrigerator in Seattle, one in the climate-controlled rooms at Yale. And then just before pupation, it got a mold in its butt and died. Irritated me. But anyway, that's our beautiful Arctic that is endemic to the Olympic Mountains. Will it survive global warming? I don't know. We do know that butterflies are changing their ranges. It's a woman at the University of Washington, Lisa. You get her PhD on the sachem. This is the sachem with this great big stigmata. And that butterfly is, Tia and I found the very first one of those in Washington State in a garden at the Vancouver Mall. And since then it has expanded dramatically up the Yakima River and in the Tri-Cities area. You found it commonly, didn't you? You find it commonly now. Yeah. But it's that one has been shown to be expanding its range in direct relation to global warming. So we're going to receive species as well as lose them, you know. It cuts both ways. I don't think we'll ever get the rainbow skipper from Mexico, though I suppose it could happen someday. You can see right through its wings. And I don't suppose we'll ever get the pink spotted swallowtail, which really did land on that pink bougainvillea. We didn't put it there. But we will be receiving an array of butterflies probably that we've never had before. So I guess that's the upside of global warming. But we hate to lose what we've already got. That has to be the last picture, doesn't it? That's not one of these girls, but it could be. No, it's not. Where's this going? Do we ever get to go to bed? With slides, you can see how many there are. I guess I was going to say that, you know, we've always been able to relate to warm and fuzzies, but this girl's kind of making the break to butterflies. Now what? Oh. These are the children of Carolus Bagdonis, a great president of Xerces for many years. This guy, Davin Bagdonis, is now a glacial researcher for global warming in the mountains of Wyoming. And he got that way because of his work with butterflies with his dad. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So, is collecting a big problem for conservation? I think you can see by now that butterflies have a little more of a problem than a few people with butterfly nets. And in fact, it's butterfly nets that have caused people to think carefully and fall asleep in their beer over butterflies. And that's what I've tried to convey in the article in Wings, that is butterflies nets, and not just nets, but cameras and binoculars, and this enthusiasm that this group espouses that's going to keep our awareness on these creatures for which we all share a mutual love. This is the habitat of the island marble out on the San Juan Islands with a certain lepidopterist in the room, a cute one. And it's people going out like John Fleckenstein to places we've never gone before that find something as dramatic as the island marble in the San Juan Islands, or the Glaucon blue on Bethel Ridge. That was a discovery of almost equal magnitude that we made today. There's the marble. And what's it feeding on? It's feeding on these exotic green beans, it looks like it, doesn't it? Green beans, these exotic mustards. But by looking and looking and looking and looking, we finally found its native host plant, which I guess is this. Is it that one? Yeah, that's right. This is the exotic mustard that it has adapted to and become common on. And we finally found that it actually does have a native host plant there as well, which we can concentrate our restoration efforts on. So if you go out to Alstrom's Prairie and walk across the bogs out there, you're probably going to see the Mariposa coppers. And this is the Mariposa copper that feeds on the dwarf cranberries out there that is someday going to be described as the macaw copper. But if this copper is conserved, it's going to be because the Park Service decides to conserve that bog without burning the whole thing. And if it does that, it will be because of the presence of this butterfly. So the point is that butterflies begin to define the conservation agenda, not just suffer at the hands of what we do. And that's the change we have to make. The butterflies define the conversation. This is one of the most recent examples. Andy Warren, formerly of Oregon, now at the McGuire Center, and George Austin, the late great George Austin, discovered a new species of owl butterfly. And they auctioned the rights to name that butterfly. They raised $40,000 through that auction for butterfly research. And that was my goal, was to match that in my butterfly thon. We beat it by $5,000. But that butterfly will only be conserved because of the work they did to conserve it. The Miami blue in the Florida Keys, almost gone. Several people working on exactly what it needs to conserve. So my point is that a lot of people now, not just Jeremy Thomas at Monk's Wood Research Station, and not just Miriam Rothschild, are looking at how we conserve the Adelaide hairstring. Once thought to be endangered, now much more common. How we conserve one butterfly after another, and that's the end. Okay.